This episode is going to explore what is trauma. And to go into this topic, I want to share what my approach to emotions and emotional healing is, and a little bit about my awareness of the body. This episode comes to you with the awareness that I am not a medical professional in any sense of the word, or a psychological professional. I am an embodiment mentor, which means that I support specifically women with healing their own emotional wounds and rising into their greatest self, their most self-authoritative, self-responsible, service to humanity self. And I do this through the medium of somatic healing, primarily. But really it's a holistic approach to the body, and that means that we are not just looking at one symptom or one event. We are looking at the body in its entirety, what is put into the body, where the body is in terms of its environment, how emotionally intelligent, spiritually intelligent we are with our body and with ourselves. So there are many factors that I always look at. And so this podcast and this episode is really to bring some light to what is the subconscious, and when we have something called trauma, what is it? And then how can we tend to it? How can we resolve it? How can we quote unquote heal? Although that word in itself often implies that we go from unhealed to healed, when really it's a bit more complex than that. We're moving from one state to the next, to the next, to the next, a constant transformation which never ends, because the self is limitless, and therefore our healing, quote unquote, can be unlimited. So if we look at it like that, then it can often be daunting to think, oh, well, I'll never heal, when really you will transform, and you will continuously transform. So I see that our journeys are more about transformation and integration than anything else. And through that journey, a deep, constant freedom can be found, a deep, constant truth can be found. The truth that you will change is probably one of the primary truths, if anything. One of the truths that we can be very certain of is change. But without being too off topic about that, what is trauma is the topic of today's episode, to bring some light to our emotions, how they run through us, and how events affect us, and what we can do about them so that we aren't worse off by them, that we aren't suffering. And so deepening into our understanding of emotions, to me, means starting to approach them as a physiological experience rather than something that is just insubstantial and elusive. Understanding that our emotions are in part in our bodies as a physiological response. In the same way that when you go outside and you get cold, you feel cold on your skin, your body starts to shiver, you have all of these physiological responses. When you feel sadness from an event that you encounter in your environment, your body has a physiological response. You want to cry, you want to seek comfort, you want to seek connection. And if you're experiencing something that is unjust, you might want to rage about it, you might feel angry, you might want to fight something physically. to put an end to the injustice. When we understand that this is the core of our emotional experience, that the body has this physiological response it wants to play out with the world, in the same way that the body wants to get warm when it's cold. Now we can start to understand that trauma, psychological trauma or emotional trauma, isn't this thing that often gets dismissed as archaic material, but it is something that we can actually ourselves and in our communities tend to. In the same way we might find somebody who is cold and needs warming up, or somebody who's hungry and needs feeding. Trauma is a being who has this experience that needs an emotional, empathetic witness to. And often then the main person that can witness that trauma is the person themselves. That is the tending to, in short. But I want to dive into that a little bit more, because often we can have our own, we can go into maybe a bit of convolutedness with that. So as I just said, to me, trauma is an event that plays out and is taken on by the psyche and the body as an experience where there was not an empathetic witness present in a really negative or shocking event or series of events. For example, it could be a case that you were bullied, a case that you experienced poverty, a case that you experienced any manner of negative, unhelpful, unloving experiences, ranging from what I like to say is the capital T traumas, the ones that really, when you know straight off the bat that there would be trauma, like sexual assault or being in a unstable country or war-torn environment, something that really can affect the body immediately and without question. And then there's trauma with a little t, like the micro violences or bullying experiences where we were just neglected constantly, some need or it was neglected, we were continuously abandoned or betrayed in small ways, and as children perhaps we weren't tended to in the right way, we weren't given love in the right way. And when I mean in the right way, I mean in the way that our body and our beings needed. For perhaps we weren't appreciated for our gifts, and we were told we needed to be and behave a certain way, and that led to us constantly fawning because we knew that we would only receive love if we acted a certain way or behaved in a certain manner or achieved a certain number of things. Perhaps we only were able to receive love if we stayed a certain size, a certain shape, and so therefore developed a disordered pattern with eating, and a number of different things like that, where trauma isn't exactly obvious, but these negative experiences caused us many different patterns of behavior which weren't loving and authentic towards ourselves. And often people experience this as perhaps a fawning, as I just mentioned, where you made yourself small, made your expression less, or completely changed who you were just to receive the love, validation of the people around you or your parents. And you could also have had a flight response where there was a lot of conflict growing up or in adulthood, in relationships, and therefore you constantly wanted to leave situations and not be present to what was going on around you because it was too much, it was too intense, and again, there was no empathy or gentle de-escalation and re-regulation of the environment with the people that this had been caused by. Perhaps you were in environments where there was a series of injustice going on, and you wanted to fight. You got angry. There were constant outbursts with you or with the people around you. You always felt you had to defend yourself, your environment, your territory. So these are kind of some examples. That's why we have these body programs, I guess you could call them, of fight, flight. Freeze is another one, where fear or uncertainty may have frozen you, and you felt like everything was too overwhelming, and so you weren't able to navigate the situation, so the body in response felt frozen in fear. This doesn't actually mean that you might be solid or rooted to the spot, although it could be. It could also be that your expression was frozen, like you couldn't get the words out that you wanted to all the time. Imagine you were sat at a table and you were being grilled constantly or intimidated, and you couldn't speak the words that defended you or fought for your corner, and so your voice was frozen. So that could be a frozen situation. So fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Flood is another one. Flood is often missed out of this, but that's when the conflict or negative event or reoccurring events cause you to experience a flood of emotions, often a flood of grief or worry or anxiety or anger or fear. And so this could be lots of tears, lots of huge emotions pouring out of you in response to your environment, the people in it, the situation. So these are some examples of things you might have experienced. So you might have not ever thought of this as being trauma, and you don't have to label it with that either. I'm talking about these things, and in the back of my mind is the beautiful system of German new medicine, which you might have come across before. If not, I would encourage you to look into it yourself. This is a system that recognizes that the body has special biological programs, and they are in response to very primal needs of the body. For example, when you have a conflict in your territory, you might have a territorial conflict, as it says in this system of medicine, and that will cause certain physiological responses of the body to heal and recover from that. So regardless of the system of German new medicine, just from the awareness of what is fight and flight and why do they happen and what is the point of them, these are to protect the body and to help the body recover in an environment where it could be in danger of essentially death. It's to help the body survive. If you imagine yourself in a tribe and you are going to be abandoned or rejected or humiliated or betrayed or any of these things, neglected, there could be a chance that the tribe doesn't give you the resources you need anymore, and therefore you find yourself without food, water, sustenance, like shelter. And so the best thing to do is, if you're in a conflict in the tribe, the body's thinking, well, let's freeze, let's fawn, or let's fight, or let's flee, let's do something to get ourselves away from the conflict, or stop the conflict from happening by pacifying the conflict through fawn or through freeze, so that we keep connected, so that we stay alive, because our bodies are wired to connection, not just as a survival thing, but because connection is inherent to consciousness. Consciousness revolves around connection, unity, because we are, as souls, as beings, fractals of the one consciousness. Unity is the highest truth of this place, this universe, this reality. So we will always orient towards connection. And funnily enough, these responses are attempts at keeping that connection in play and keeping us alive enough to have that connection. So we get what we need. And when people say, I don't know why my body does this, I don't know why I have this stress response, or why do I get stressed? Your body is trying to resolve a situation where it feels like it needs to survive. And so it's not going to just play out the same program. It's going to create a special program, an active response that might get you to a place that you can thrive better, that you can connect, get better resources, get what you need. So say you're stressed at work. That stress is your body keeping you alive. The body doing its thing so that you don't go into a mode that everything starts to falter and shut down. So, say, for example, if you're in a stressful environment, your mind is starting to pay attention to the fact that the environment you're in is threatening, that is causing you a great deal of unhappiness or just grief or frustration. So everything around you becomes high alert and high vigilance for the body, just to make sure that you're safe. And that's what you experience in stress, is the body going into that high alert mode. So going back to what is trauma. Trauma is when we experience an event that is in an environment or in a situation with people where we did not get to complete this biological, physical response of the body. We did not get to feel this response all the way through in the moment. And so the body continued to have this program on standby where it could activate at the next moment, often called a trigger, in order to keep us alive again. Because in the mind of the body, or in the subconscious, we are not yet resolved from the threat. So say you had a fight with somebody, or say you had an experience as a child where your needs weren't met, where you weren't given attention to, I don't know, your emotions weren't tended to in a way that helped you soothe. And so the body realized that it wasn't going to receive love unless it didn't express emotionally. So it continued to be in a program of shutting down its emotions, going into what's called shutdown mode, and not expressing its emotions in order to feel love and connection from your parents. And so in that situation, there would perhaps have been what's called a trauma, because there was no resolve of the parents being able to be present to the emotions, the empathy and the witness, the empathetic witness was not present in that experience. And so continuing throughout life, in this hypothetical situation, this person would not have resolved this feeling of having safety around expressing their emotions. And so in any situation where they needed to express their emotions, which is, I guess, the trigger, the program would have come up of, nope, shut down, don't express. And these have physiological characteristics to them. The shutdown mode is often known as the dorsal vagal, and then we have the ventral vagal, and we have the parasympathetic. These are terms that are part of Stephen Porges's Polyvagal Theory, which I can go into in another episode. However, these are parts of our nervous system, and they do have corresponding physiological characteristics. For example, the heart slows down in shutdown mode. The heart speeds up when you're in ventral vagal. When you're in parasympathetic, or in what's called the rest and process mode, this is a more gentle heart rate, and also arousal and what's called hypo or hyperarousal systems of the body have different physiological responses, like digestion stops or slows in our sympathetic fight or flight. Digestion activates in parasympathetic. These also correspond with our breath. Our inhales connected to the fight, flight, stress response. Our exhales connected to the rest, digest, and process response. So we can also map these on to the actual organ systems of the body. But that's for another episode. This is a very brief exploration of what trauma is, and if you're interested in learning more about that, I would encourage you to grab my book. It's an ebook. It's actually a book that you can go through, and it's interactive, and it's got recordings alongside it to help you start to unravel any traumatic responses in the body. It's called Activating the Internal, and I will have a link up for it in this episode to go to. But what's really important to understand and to take away from this episode is that trauma is a physiological response that hasn't been able to resolve in the body. It is not a packet of emotion that is just sitting in the body, or a memory that is just sitting in the body, because often people say trauma is stored in the body, and that's something that I don't really get on board with, mainly because it kind of makes us think that we're walking around like as these static bodies with just little pockets of trauma all over the place in us, when really it's more like we have these physiological responses that can come up, and they're just patterns. They're patterns of the body, like patterns on your skin, or patterns of behavior. You know, they're not really one specific cell in the body that's holding this trauma, or a clump of cells, you know, holding a trauma. But there are patterns that play out when we're in certain environments, certain situations, and with certain people and certain types of people. And they may go dormant for many, many years before they start to come up. It just depends on who we're around and where we are. I find that often I've had experiences where for years when I've been alone, and when I was single, I had a certain level of emotional stability, and then when I was in a relationship and I had a lot of relationship trauma from the past, that all came to the surface again because I was in a deep union with somebody, and therefore all my wounds of being in relationships came up. So that's also why I don't believe in the notion that we just heal once and we're done with it, or we sit in a therapy room for a few months and we're good to go with that aspect of our life. We encounter trauma in very, very much in cycles of our lives, and that's also why it's important to not see it as just these pockets of consciousness that sit in us. And they are patterns of feeling, and they are resolved through feeling them fully. So that's the next thing. Trauma is because of the nature of what it is, because it's essentially an event or a pattern that needs to resolve. It needs to be felt to be resolved. When I say that the event itself, when it happened, or the times that it happened before in our lives, meant that it wasn't able to be resolved in the moment. Say we were in a situation where we were in a really intense event, like an abusive situation, for example. And in that situation, we were constantly not given the space we needed to cry and be upset and be afraid, because we were constantly vigilant of when the next explosive experience was going to happen. When we finally left that situation, the trauma doesn't just go away, because those experiences, as I said, need to play out fully. So the fear that we felt needs to be felt fully, or the sadness and the grief that we felt needs to be felt fully. Otherwise, the body is looking for the next situation where this can come up so that we can play that out. And this is something then that we have to look at as like a pain that wants to be fully felt so that it can be resolved. And often we kind of get this a bit incorrect when we say we need to let go of things. And I find that it can be hard to tell somebody to let go of something when they actually just want to feel it. And they might want to feel it a bunch of times. in similar ways, like the German New Medicine approach to illness is to let the healing phase, which is often the ill symptoms, happen and play out, and often intervening is slowing that down, that process down. When we try to intervene too early in an emotional experience, we often like to stop it happening. This is often when the trauma itself happens, when we're told we shouldn't cry, when we're told to suck it up, or say we're in an event where we just, in the pace of the event that happened, or in the situation we were in, it wasn't safe to feel. That's often when what we could say is the trauma strikes and remains to be resolved. So when we go back to that experience in our minds and recall it, which is often part of what the somatic healing that I bring to others is about, is to recall the experience, to bring those feelings up in a safe environment, and to learn how to feel them fully so that they fully leave us. And you can imagine it like you're carrying like a bucket and you need to pour it all out, but you're like, no, I just want this to resolve, and you're looking at the bucket of water and you're like, I just need to just let it go, but you're not able to pour out the water. You're just still holding on to the bucket. So like, in order to let go of that situation, you need to pour those feelings out of you. You need to let them run through you. And that can often be the scariest thing. And for some reason, well, there's a clear reason actually, but it's like the body doesn't want to do that. Mainly because it's afraid. Because if you imagine that the original program of stopping you feeling that way was to employ a survival program, like a flight response, was to help you stay alive in that situation. To fully feel that experience feels like, well, if we're still in it, then we might encounter death. And so feeling the grief all the way through, or feeling the sadness or the anger or the fear all the way through, can feel like almost encountering death for the body. And that's why often we get stuck at this point in our process of resolving the emotion. And I recognize this a lot with everyone that I work with and myself, is that when it comes to taking that plunge into the void, into the depth of the emotion, it can be really daunting. And that's why creating a safe environment where you have all of the love and comfort and support you need can be really important. But also having the courage to say, I'm going to step away from this pattern once and for all and let it resolve in me. That courage is one of the most powerful things you can have. And I think that I've only ever kind of come into contact with this in a very raw form when going through childbirth, because I guess the other form of that is death itself, is just going so full force into the unknown that and really not being able to avoid it because it has to happen to you. It can be very intense and strips you down to the bare bones of who you are. And it's very much the case that a deep trauma can do that for you. And so not only are you letting go of this event and the pattern of surviving this event, But you are also stepping into the unknown of who you are without that pain. And that's why the facing being your own empathetic witness to your trauma can be a very, very deep and powerful and courageous experience. Well, I think it always is, to be honest. So that's probably a good place to end this little episode on what is trauma. There's so many more things I could say, but again, I will go into more in more episodes. I want to explore a lot of different things on this podcast, and we're just getting started. So let this be an introductory episode to understanding your emotions and wounding a little bit deeper. And if you have questions, please let me know through my socials, and I can answer them in these episodes without going into too much detail in DMs and comments. I can just answer them here. So, I'm so glad if you've enjoyed this episode, thank you. And I will be back with another episode very soon. As always, you can find my 2 ebooks, Activating the Internal, which is the interactive ebook, and also How to Feel, Reprogramming the Body After Trauma, is available on Amazon in a lot of countries. So it's available on Kindle for now. Please go ahead and check those out if you're interested in learning more immediately. And I will see you very soon.